Welcome back. Before we begin our spooky adventure tonight, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with other horror enthusiasts to give us more motivation. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is, so leave a comment below and cheer me on YouTube.
Story 1. I took the fire road to save time and found a place that shouldn't have existed. My name is Aaron Calloway. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've worked as an insurance field adjuster in Colorado, Wyoming, and northern Utah. My job is about as glamorous as it sounds. I drive a company SUV or my own pickup if the roads are bad, take photos of damaged roofs and flooded basements, crawl under porches, inspect barns split open by wind, and spend too much time in roadside diners typing reports while my coffee goes cold. The reason I'm telling you that first is because people hear this story and assume I was some thrill seeker, some solo hiking idiot who watched too many survival shows and thought she could handle the backcountry because she owned boots and a flashlight. That isn't what happened. I'm not reckless. I'm not one of those people who hears a scream in the woods and says, "Hello? Is someone there?" Like they're auditioning to die first in a horror movie. I've spent years driving county roads where there's no cell signal, no traffic, and no help for 40 miles. I keep a trauma kit in my truck, 2 flashlights, a road flare, bear spray, a wool blanket, a tire inflator, bottled water, protein bars, a handheld radio, and a Glock 19 my ex-husband insisted I learn to use after a man followed me from a gas station outside Rollins one winter. I make good decisions. That's what bothers me most about what happened in the Medicine Bow that October. I made the smart choice almost every step of the way, and I still ended up in a place where I found human bones wired together in the dark. It happened in 2022, late in the season, the week after the first real cold snap. I had spent the day outside Laramie, inspecting a property claim on an old hunting cabin that had burned halfway down after a generator fire. The owner met me there in a faded red Ram pickup, walked me through the blackened shell of the place, and repeated 3 different times that the fire department had been too slow. By the time I finished the exterior photos, checked the detached shed, and drove back to town to upload my files at a motel with decent Wi-Fi, the sun was already dropping. I had a reservation in Casper that night. Normally, I would have taken the interstate east and then stayed on the main route. But the motel clerk in Laramie, a girl in her 20s with a silver nose ring and a Wyoming Cowboys hoodie, mentioned that traffic was backed up because of a jackknifed semi farther north. She said if I wanted to avoid sitting in headlights for an hour, I could cut across on a Forest Service road that connected back to the highway. It was longer by distance, shorter by time if the road stayed dry. Locals use it all the time, she said. I should say here that I did not blindly trust one offhand comment from a motel clerk and plunge into the wilderness like a moron. I checked the route on my offline maps. It was a real road. A graded fire road, not some fantasy dotted line vanishing into green. I also asked the owner of the burned cabin when I called him about a missing signature. He said the same thing. "Yeah, 217. You'll come out near Elk Hollow," he said. "Bit washboarded in places. Don't fly around the curves. Hunters are all over there this time of year." That mattered to me less than it should have. Hunting season in the Mountain West means more than rifles. It means men drinking in camps, old grievances, illegal baiting, trespassing disputes, wounded animals, and people shooting at movement. I grew up around guns. I'm not anti-hunting, but I've worked enough claims involving tree stands, accidental discharges, and drunk cousins in blaze orange to know the woods are not safer when they're full of armed people. Still, it was only supposed to be a cut-through, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. At 5:28 p.m., I left Laramie with a gas station coffee, half a breakfast burrito wrapped in foil on the passenger seat, and classic rock humming low through the speakers. The sky was already going hard gray, in that way the plains do before dark. Not colorful, just drained. Wind pushed dry grass in waves across the fence lines. Around 40 minutes later, I turned off onto County Road 12, then onto Forest Service 217. At first, it was fine. Gravel, potholes, ruts from previous rain, now stiffening with cold. Nothing my Tacoma couldn't handle. Pines closed in on either side as the road climbed. The air coming through the vents smelled like dust, sap, and something metallic. That cold iron smell you get when night is coming fast. Radio reception turned to static within 10 minutes. That didn't bother me. I switched it off and kept driving. Another 10 minutes passed, and I noticed I hadn't seen any other vehicles. No hunters headed out, no side-by-sides, no beat-up pickups with coolers strapped in the bed. Just trees, cut banks, and the road snaking ahead under my headlights. Then I came around a bend and saw the deer. At least, I thought it was a deer. It stood in the road about 60 yards ahead, broadside in the fading light. Too thin, too still. I hit the brakes and slowed to a crawl. It turned its head toward me, and my stomach tightened. The body was deer-sized, yes, but the head was wrong. Not deformed wrong, not antler tangled in brush wrong. It looked flayed, white and wet, like all the hide had been stripped away. One eye reflected bright in the headlights. The other side of its face was dark and hollow. It didn't run. It just stared. Then, with a jerk so sudden it made me curse out loud, it stepped off the road and vanished into the trees. I sat there for a second with my foot on the brake, telling myself it had mange, or had caught its face on barbed wire, or I was seeing badly in the low light. I should have turned around then. That was the first moment my body knew something my brain didn't want to admit. Instead, I kept going. A mile or so later, I passed a weathered sign for a ranger station road. The arrow pointed down a narrower spur track half hidden by brush. The station itself wasn't listed on my map, which usually means old, closed, or both. That was when I saw the pickup. It was parked half off the road near the spur, an older green Ford with mud splashed up the doors and a dented front fender. No one inside, no lights, no movement. A blaze orange vest hung from the driver's side mirror. That by itself was not strange during hunting season. What was strange was the amount of blood on the tailgate. I braked again and stared. At first I thought it might be from a dressed elk or mule deer. Hunters haul messy things all the time. But the smear pattern wasn't right. It wasn't a big pooled drag stain from an animal being loaded. It looked like handprints. Several of them. Long pulls of dark red dried almost black, with narrow finger streaks near the latch. I stayed in the truck, locked the doors, put it in reverse. Then my rear tires spun uselessly in loose gravel. The truck fishtailed slightly before catching. I backed up 3 car lengths and stopped, breathing harder than I needed to, annoyed at myself for getting rattled by what might have been nothing. I remember looking at the clock on the dashboard. 6:17. I also remember hearing a sound from the trees on my left. One sharp crack. Not a rifle, more like a branch breaking under weight. I immediately reached over and pulled my pistol from the center console, set it in my lap, and scanned the woods. Nothing moved in my headlights. Pine trunks, underbrush, a few pale aspen poles beyond. Then a voice called out, "Hey!" A man's voice, not far, maybe 30 yards in. I did not answer. "Hey, don't leave!" I still didn't answer. I put the truck in drive and started forward again, meaning to pass the spur road and keep going. If somebody needed help, they could come into the road where I could see them. The voice came again, closer this time, and angrier. "Lady, stop!" And that was enough for me. A person who genuinely needs help will usually say what's wrong. "Call 911. My friend is hurt. Please." They don't just bark at your vehicle from the tree line like they're trying to flag down prey. I hit the gas. The Tacoma jolted over washboard ruts, and I kept my eyes on the road, pulse hammering. I rounded one bend, then another. The trees thickened. Twilight collapsed into real darkness. My headlights tunneled through dust and trunks and brush. Then something slammed into the passenger side of the truck, hard enough to rock it. I shouted and yanked the wheel. There was a flash of pale movement outside the window. Not clear, not human-shaped enough to name. Just a white blur and a wet impact sound. The truck skidded, clipped the edge of the ditch, bounced hard, and died. For a second, I didn't understand what had happened. The headlights stayed on, pointed crookedly into the trees. The engine was dead. The smell of antifreeze hit a moment later, sweet and chemical. Steam curled up from the crumpled front end. I'd hit something, or something had hit me. My seatbelt locked me in place. My heart was pounding so violently it made my vision pulse. I unbuckled, grabbed the pistol and flashlight, and forced myself to breathe before doing anything else. Outside, it was suddenly silent. No engine, no radio, no wind, just ticking metal from the truck cooling and the faint hiss of leaking fluid. I didn't want to get out. Every nerve in me screamed not to. But staying in a disabled truck on a dead forest road after dark, with no signal and an unknown person back there, wasn't safe either. I cracked the driver's door and shined the flashlight around. Nothing. The road behind me was empty. The ditch was thick with brush. My headlights lit up low branches and a spray of gravel. I stepped out slowly, pistol low but ready. The front passenger corner of the truck had taken the hit. The fender was buckled in. The headlight housing had shattered. Something pale was caught on the broken metal. At first, I thought it was hide. Then I saw hair. Human hair. Long, wet, dark with blood near the roots. My scalp went cold. It was caught in the cracked seam above the wheel well. Several strands pulled loose, with skin still attached. A ragged flap of scalp no bigger than 2 fingers, gray-white on one side, bloody on the other. I gagged so hard I tasted coffee and bile. That was when I heard the dragging sound. Behind me. Slow. Heavy. Like something wet being pulled over gravel. I spun so fast, the flashlight beam shook wildly through the trees. Nothing on the road. Then the beam caught movement in the ditch. A shape crawling on all fours through the sage and brush. Too low and wrong to process in the moment. Pale back. Dark hair hanging in strips. One arm, or front leg for one insane half-second my brain tried to call it, reached forward and hooked into the dirt, dragging the rest behind it. It stopped when the light hit it. I saw a face then. Not an animal. A woman. Or what had once been a woman. The left side of her head was peeled open to the skull. Not neatly. Torn. Her scalp hung back in a black, bloody curtain, exposing white bones slick with dirt and pine needles. One eye was swollen shut. The other was wide and reflecting my light. Her mouth opened. The sound she made was not a scream. It was a hoarse, bubbling whisper. "Don't let him." A gunshot cracked somewhere in the dark, and the side of her face exploded. I had never seen a human head destroyed up close before. Not really. Not outside photographs from claims or training materials. Reality is worse. The bullet took her through the mouth or cheek. Teeth and blood burst outward in a shining spray. Her body folded into itself and dropped flat into the ditch like a puppet with the strings cut. I fired instinctively toward the trees where the shot had come from. 2 rounds, maybe 3. I don't know. Muzzle flash lit trunks and brush. Then I was moving, not thinking, sprinting for the passenger side of the truck because the driver's side was too exposed. Another shot snapped past and hit metal behind me with a sharp clang. I dove into the cab, locked the doors, and crouched low, trying to make myself small. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the pistol. No signal on my phone. Of course there wasn't. I tried starting the truck anyway. The engine turned once, screamed, and died. Coolant temp redlined. Whatever I hit had damaged more than the headlight. Then a man stepped into the headlights. He was maybe 50, tall, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a tan canvas jacket and an orange cap. He carried a rifle down at his side and walked with the calm, unhurried confidence of someone who thinks the worst has already happened. His beard was mostly gray. Even at that distance, I could see something dark spattered across the front of his jacket. Blood. He stopped in front of the truck and raised his free hand as if to soothe a horse. "Ma'am," he called, "put the gun down. You're okay now." I didn't answer. "I know how this looks," he said. "That woman was sick. She attacked my brother up at camp. Been living wild out here. Bit him bad." He took one more step forward. My headlights lit the right side of his face. There were scratches on his neck, fresh ones. "She killed 2 dogs," he continued. "We've been trying to track her since yesterday." People lie in interesting ways when they think panic will make you stupid. He wasn't talking like a man in a real emergency. He was talking like he'd rehearsed a version of events simple enough to force over mine. I kept the pistol aimed at his chest through the glass. He saw that and stopped pretending to smile. "You can't drive that truck," he said. "Radiator's gone. There's a ranger station down the spur. We got a radio there." We. That word tightened everything in my stomach. I looked past him into the trees and saw another figure between the trunks. Then another. Men in blaze orange, partially hidden, spreading. Hunters. Or something worse. He followed my gaze and nodded once, like there was no point hiding it anymore. "My nephew's with me," he said, "and my brother. We're trying to help you." Maybe on some other night, with some other set of facts, I might have gone with them. A disabled truck on a dark forest road is a coffin with windows. But I had just watched one of those men shoot a dying woman through the face before she could finish a sentence. He must have seen something change in my expression because his voice sharpened. "Open the door." I didn't. He lifted the rifle slightly. What saved me in that moment was something dumb and practical. My work tablet. It was mounted on the dash and by some miracle still had satellite sync enabled from an earlier upload. Not enough for calls, not enough for anything complicated, but enough to ping location when it briefly caught connection. I snatched it up, crouched below the window line, and hit the emergency app our company required for field inspections. The spinning icon turned. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. One of the men said, "She doing something?" Then, blessedly, the tablet chirped once. Location sent. I don't know if it actually went out right then, or 5 minutes later, or at all. I only know the sound made the man in the headlights move. He raised the rifle. I shot through the windshield. Glass burst inward in glittering chunks. The first round took him somewhere high in the chest or shoulder. I saw him jerk hard sideways. The second missed, or maybe hit lower. He stumbled backward with a noise that was more surprise than pain. The rifle discharged as he fell, blowing bark off a tree beside the truck. Then all hell broke loose. More gunshots, shattered side mirror. A bullet punched through the rear window and blew fabric stuffing out of the seat behind me. I threw the truck into reverse again and floored it. This time it moved. Barely. Horribly. Grinding and screaming. But it moved. The Tacoma lurched backward down the road, wheels slipping, engine knocking like a hammer in a dryer. I was steering half-blind through fractured glass, trying not to slide into the ditch. One of the men ran into the headlights, then vanished as I spun the wheel. I heard a thud at the back corner like I'd clipped him, but I can't swear to it. I backed 100 yards, maybe more, until the road widened at a turnout. There I cut the wheel, rammed it into drive, and somehow got the truck facing back the way I'd come. The radiator warning light was blazing. Steam rolled up. The engine sounded terminal. But I had momentum, and I took it. I drove like that for maybe 3 miles before the truck died for good. It happened on a straight stretch between pines, the engine seizing with a metallic shriek so violent it felt like the whole frame locked. I coasted to a stop, grabbed my backpack, trauma kit, flashlight, phone, pistol, and got out. No headlights behind me yet. No voices. Just the darkness of the forest and the ticking ruin of my truck. That was when I made the decision that probably kept me alive. I didn't stay on the road. Roads are where vehicles travel. Roads are where armed men in trucks will find you first. I crossed the ditch and went into the trees, moving fast but carefully, keeping my flashlight off except for brief flashes downward to avoid breaking an ankle. I headed uphill. That wasn't random. In the Mountain West, road, drainage, and camp structures often cluster low. Higher ground meant better chance of seeing lights, hearing engines, maybe even getting a signal. It also meant a slower approach for anyone following me. The forest at night felt huge in a way daylight never communicates. Pines crowded close. Fallen logs became bodies in the dark. Every branch I brushed sounded too loud. My own breathing echoed inside my skull. After maybe 15 minutes of climbing, I saw a weak square of yellow light through the trees. I dropped immediately behind a deadfall and listened. No voices, no engine, just a faint rhythmic clanking, metal tapping metal in the wind. I waited a full minute before creeping closer. It was the ranger station, or what had once been one. A one-story log structure with a sagging porch, one boarded window, and a roofline dipping in the middle. Light glowed through a side window covered with old mesh. A radio antenna leaned crooked from the roof. Beside the porch sat a Polaris side-by-side and a generator that had gone cold. There was also another vehicle parked behind the cabin, a white Chevy pickup with no plates on the rear. So the men had not lied about there being a station. That almost made it worse. I circled wide through the trees until I reached the back. The building smelled wrong up close. Not just mildew and old wood. There was a chemical reek under it. Bleach, diesel, and something sweet and rotten that turned my stomach. The back door stood slightly open. I know what that sounds like. I know how stupid it sounds. You're thinking I should have kept walking. Maybe I should have. But I was in the middle of black timber, with at least 3 armed men somewhere behind me. No vehicle, no service, and the first structure I'd seen had light and supposedly a radio. Also, and this matters, I could hear something inside. A faint thumping, irregular, like someone kicking weakly against wood. I approached the door from the side, pistol up, and nudged it wider with my foot. The kitchen inside looked like a place people had been using hard and carelessly for weeks. Dirty plates, canned beans, beer cans, mud on the floorboards. A cutting table smeared dark, a chest freezer against the wall, one bare bulb hanging over the sink. And tied to a chair in the middle of the room was a man wearing thermal underwear and one hunting boot. His head jerked up so fast the chair scraped. He was in his 60s maybe, face gray with shock and dehydration, beard matted with spit. Duct tape hung loose from one wrist where he had been trying to work free. His lower lip was split, one eye nearly swollen shut. "Oh, thank God," he croaked. "Jesus Christ, untie me." I crossed the room in 3 steps and cut the tape from his wrists with the trauma shears in my kit. He nearly collapsed getting up. "Who did this?" I asked. He swallowed and licked blood from his lip. "Denton, my brother, and Kyle, my boy." His voice shook with humiliation more than fear. "They've lost their goddamn minds." That stopped me for a second. "Brother and son?" He nodded once, then looked toward the front of the station like he expected them to materialize through the wall. "They've been bringing people up here." A cold, numb sensation spread through my chest. "What people?" He looked at me with the awful, exhausted clarity of someone who has already said the unsayable in his head too many times. "Hunters, drifters, whoever takes the road alone." There are moments when the human mind tries to reject information because accepting it rearranges the whole world too quickly. That was one of mine. I had seen blood on the truck. I had seen the dead woman. I knew these men were dangerous. But there's a leap from dangerous to systematic, from predator to process. He saw the doubt or horror on my face and pointed with a shaking hand toward the freezer. "Don't open that," he said immediately, almost choking on the words. "Don't. Just don't." I opened it anyway. Inside were wrapped packages of meat in butcher paper, stacked beside 2 black trash bags cinched closed with orange cord. The first bag had torn near the top. I saw fingers. Human fingers, pale and swollen, nails blue at the beds, curled as if still gripping something in death. There was a wedding band on one hand. The skin had sloughed in places, exposing red meat beneath. I dropped the lid and stumbled backward, dry heaving. "Jesus," I whispered. The old man leaned one hand on the table to steady himself. "I told you." "What are they doing?" He shook his head once. "I don't know when it started. Maybe after Kyle came back from prison. Meth, maybe. Or just evil finally wearing through." His voice went thin. "First it was deer camps getting hit. Then folks disappearing. Denton said no one cared about men who drove out alone. Said the forest takes what the forest takes." A sound came from down the hall then, a muffled, frantic banging. The old man flinched so violently I thought he'd fall. "There's somebody else here," I said. He grabbed my sleeve. "Don't go alone." But I was already moving.
The hallway led past a bunk room and a washroom to a locked door at the end. The banging came from behind it. I threw the latch and opened it. At first, my flashlight caught only shelves. Then the room resolved. It wasn't storage. It was a root cellar entrance they had converted into something else.
Concrete steps descended into darkness. Along the walls hung chains, rope, 2 sets of handcuffs, and what looked like animal hooks until I saw the hair caught on one of them. At the base of the stairs, in a pool of yellow light from a work lamp, sat a woman in a filthy parka with one ankle chained to a pipe. She squinted up at me and raised an arm against the beam. The smell hit me then. Blood, human waste, bleach, rot. Behind her, against the far wall, were shelves lined with jars, tools, plastic tubs, and bones. Not 1 or 2, dozens. Long bones stripped white, jaws, vertebrae, 3 skulls wired through the eye sockets and hung from a beam with orange survey tape tied around them so they turned gently in the draft. On the floor beneath them were dark, old stains gone brown-black into the concrete. The woman looked maybe 30, maybe younger. Starvation and terror flatten age. Her nose had been broken at some point and healed crooked. There were bruises in yellow and purple stages up both forearms. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't leave me." I went down the steps and cut the chain from the pipe as fast as I could manage, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the shears twice. The cuff stayed on her ankle, but at least she was free of the wall. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 3 days, she said. "Maybe 4. Her voice was papery, dehydrated. She kept glancing upward toward the ceiling as if expecting footsteps. On a table beside her sat a metal tray and what looked like butcher knives. One of them wasn't clean. There was flesh caught near the handle. I didn't ask what they had done to her, or to anyone else. I helped her stand. She was weak, but she could move. When we came back into the kitchen, the old man was at the sink trying to drink straight from the tap with trembling hands. He looked at the woman and sagged with relief so deep it hurt to watch. Then from outside came the distant growl of an engine. All 3 of us froze. Headlights swept briefly through the cracks in the boarded window. "They're back," the old man whispered. What happened next took maybe 15 seconds. I killed the kitchen light. The woman started shaking uncontrollably. The old man whispered, "There's a hatch under the bunk room floor. Old service crawl space. You can get out behind the station." I looked at him. "Come on." He shook his head. "Come on," I said again, harder. He looked toward the front door, then toward the dark hall, and something old and broken settled across his face. "I can slow them down," he said. "They know me. If I vanish too, they'll tear the place apart." I grabbed his arm. "They're going to kill you." His eyes watered, but he didn't look away. "Maybe. But if they catch all 3 of us, then it's for nothing." There was no time to argue. Truck doors slammed outside. Male voices. One shouted my description, "The woman from the road," like they'd been talking about me the whole drive back. The old man shoved us toward the bunk room. "Go!" So we went. The hatch was under a stained army blanket and a rusted bed frame. I yanked it open, and a draft of cold, dirt-smelling air rose up. The crawl space below was little more than a wooden shaft dropping into packed earth. As I helped the woman down, I heard the front door crash open and a man yell from the kitchen. Then the old man screamed. It wasn't long. That was the worst part. It cut off abruptly, the way an animal sound stops when something vital is severed. The woman clamped both hands over her mouth. I dropped into the crawl space after her and pulled the hatch almost closed above us, leaving a thin seam for air. Boots thundered through the room overhead. A voice I recognized, the man from the road, shouted, "He untied himself?" Another voice, younger, "No way." Something heavy struck a wall. Then a wet impact. Then another. I knew without seeing that they were beating the old man's body after death, just to answer their own confusion. I have tried not to think about that. I fail all the time. We crawled in darkness on our elbows through dirt and splintered beams, the woman breathing in small panicked gasps ahead of me. The space narrowed twice, and I thought we were trapped. Then cold air hit my face, and I saw night through roots and brush. We emerged behind the station into a shallow drainage choked with willow and deadfall. For a second, I thought we might actually make it. Then a flashlight beam swept the trees to our right. "Back here!" Gunfire tore through branches above us. We ran. Not like in movies, not gracefully. She stumbled. I dragged her. We crashed through brush, slid down the drainage, climbed the opposite bank on hands and knees. Another shot cracked, and something punched splinters into my cheek from a tree trunk inches away. Ahead of us, maybe 80 yards through the timber, I saw a dull, reflective marker nailed to a post. Trail. We lunged toward it. The sign was for an old horse trail leading down canyon. The path was barely visible, but it gave us direction. I half carried the woman downhill while flashlight beams jittered behind us through the trees. One of the men shouted that we were headed toward the creek. Another laughed. That laugh bothered me more than the gunfire. People don't laugh when prey is getting away. They laugh when the terrain ahead does the work for them. The trail ended at a washout. The hillside had collapsed years earlier, leaving a steep chute of loose rock and dead timber dropping to black water below. The creek sounded wider than it looked on any map. Fast, swollen, freezing. The woman started sobbing. Behind us, boots were closing. There wasn't a good option. There was only the option that wasn't standing still. "We go down," I whispered. She shook her head violently. "I can't." "You can, or they'll butcher us." That word did it. We slid more than climbed, grabbing roots, dislodging rocks, slamming knees and hips into frozen dirt. I lost the flashlight. It bounced away into darkness. At one point, the woman slipped and nearly took us both, but I caught the back of her parka and we crashed the rest of the way into the creek together. The water was so cold, it felt hot. Not poetic hot. Nerve-destroying hot. A white flash up both legs and into my spine. We scrambled across on slick boulders while current shoved at our knees. On the far bank, I turned just in time to see one of the men at the top of the chute outlined against the sky, aiming downward. I fired twice. Maybe I hit him, maybe not, but he jerked back and vanished from view. We kept moving along the creek until we found an old footbridge, just 2 log stringers and rotten planks. And beyond that, miracle of miracles, a gravel road. Not the main forest road, a maintenance road. But road meant possibility. And 30 seconds later, we heard the sound of a vehicle. I stepped into the middle of that road with my pistol in one hand and both arms raised, ready to dive if it was them. The headlights slowed. A sheriff's unit rolled into view. I nearly collapsed on the spot. Later, I learned the emergency ping from my work tablet had gone through after all, bouncing off satellite and routing to county dispatch with partial coordinates. The deputy on duty had also received a second call from a hunter farther down who reported hearing multiple gunshots and seeing lights off the service road. That combination was the only reason help came when it did. Deputy Elena Ruiz got out with her weapon drawn until she saw us properly in the headlights. 2 soaked women, one bleeding from the face, one barefoot with a steel cuff still on her ankle. She holstered immediately and called for medics, backup, and state support so fast her words blurred. I remember grabbing her sleeve and saying, "There's a station up there. Bones, freezer, 3 men." Then I started shaking so hard my teeth knocked together. The county sealed off the area before dawn. What they found in that station made regional news for about a week, and then, like most terrible things, got condensed into a few digestible facts for public consumption. There were human remains in the cellar, yes. More than the 3 skulls I saw. Some buried in lime beyond the shed. Some burned in a pit behind the station mixed with deer and elk bones to confuse analysis. Packages of human meat in the freezer, though the papers avoided saying that too plainly. Personal belongings from missing persons cases stretching back years. Watches, a pink child's backpack, phones stripped of batteries, hunting licenses, 2 wallets, a set of dentures, a woman's wedding ring found in a coffee can full of loose teeth. The old man in the kitchen was Arthur Vance. His brother Denton and Denton's son Kyle were the 2 main suspects, along with another drifter they sometimes used as hired help in exchange for meth and cash. Arthur had apparently tried to leave more than once and had his leg broken the previous winter. They kept him because he knew the roads, knew how to talk to people, knew how to make a bad place seem ordinary from a distance. The woman in the cellar was named Marisol Vega. She had gone missing on a road trip from Idaho to Nebraska. Her family had been told for 4 days that she was probably just out of contact. Denton died in the woods before dawn, found with a gunshot wound and a broken neck at the base of a rock chute above the creek. The papers never confirmed which injured him first. Kyle was taken alive after a search dog found him hiding under slash near an old logging cut. The 3rd man, Aaron Pike, shot himself in the mouth during a traffic stop outside Saratoga 2 days later. Arthur died in that station before deputies reached him. Blunt force trauma, according to the report. Multiple impacts, some post-mortem. I read that line so many times I can still see it when I close my eyes. People ask me what the worst part was. They assume it was the cellar, or the skulls, or the woman by the road whose face was shot apart before she could warn me. It wasn't. The worst part was how normal the whole thing looked from the outside. A Forest Service road, hunting season, a pickup with an orange vest hanging from the mirror, a ranger station with a generator and a radio antenna. Men who knew the right words. Men who understood that in America, especially out west, isolation is so ordinary that it can hide almost anything. For months after, I couldn't drive mountain roads after dark. I still can't stop at small gas stations without checking if anyone else is parked there first. I don't like seeing coolers in truck beds. I don't like blaze orange in the rearview mirror. I don't like the sweet smell of antifreeze because for 1 split second it turns into blood and cold air and hair caught in bent metal. And there is one part I've never put in the official statement because it sounds insane, and because I already know what people do with details they don't understand. When deputies photographed the ditch where the dying woman crawled toward me, they found drag marks, blood, and fragments of teeth. They did not find her whole body. Not there. Not anywhere nearby. They found tissue. They found one ear. They found part of her jaw farther downhill, but not the rest. The official explanation was that in the confusion of the night, after I fled and before law enforcement secured the scene, The men must have moved her remains. Maybe. But when search teams went back over the road at first light, one deputy noted something in his report that I wasn't supposed to see, and only did because an investigator accidentally left the folder open during my follow-up interview. It said there were signs of scavenger activity, inconsistent with coyotes or bears. It also said there were unusual impressions in the soft ditch mud adjacent to the blood. Not boot prints, not paw prints. Hand-shaped, long-fingered, deep, irregular. Like something had braced itself there and hauled weight away into the trees. I know what I saw in my headlights when I first stepped from the truck. I know it was a woman, mutilated and barely alive. I know a rifle shot destroyed her face. But before that shot, when she dragged herself through the ditch and the flashlight hit her, there was something about the way she moved that didn't fit inside human injury alone. Too fast in bursts, too low, too practiced. Maybe trauma does that to memory. Maybe the mind distorts shapes in the dark to make terror feel bigger and cleaner than it was. Or maybe Denton and Kyle weren't the only predators feeding off that road. I haven't been back. I never will. And whenever someone tells me they save time by taking forest roads after dark because they know what they're doing, I think of that station, those skulls wired together in the cellar draft, slowly turning above the stains on the floor. And I tell them the truth. It's never the wilderness itself that scares me now. It's the structures people build inside it. The ones that look useful from a distance. The ones with the light on. The ones that make you think help is waiting until you get close enough to smell the bleach and rot. Story 2. The thing they called the Wolfman wasn't the worst thing in those woods. My name is Travis Hale, and before I tell this story, I need to make one thing very clear. I did not go into those woods looking for a monster. I wasn't some idiot with a YouTube channel, a GoPro, and a fantasy about becoming the first person to catch Bigfoot on camera. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't high. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anybody. In the fall of 2019, I was 39 years old, living outside Mena, Arkansas, and working as a diesel mechanic for a logging outfit that serviced trucks, skidders, and harvesters across Polk County and the western side of the Ouachita National Forest. I'd spent most of my life around timber roads, hunting leases, creek bottoms, trailheads, old ranger stations, and people who preferred trees to neighbors. I knew the woods well enough to respect them. I knew how sound carried in the dark, how quickly weather could turn, how easy it was to step off a game trail and lose your bearings in country you thought you knew. That's why what happened to me still bothers me in a way I can't explain. Because if there was anybody who should have recognized the signs early, it should have been me. The first time I heard about it was at a diner off Highway 71, just north of Acorn. It was one of those narrow places with cracked vinyl booths, antlers mounted over the pie case, and a waitress who called every man under 60 baby, and every man over 60 hun. I was there before sunrise, grabbing eggs, coffee, and a biscuit before driving up County Road 62 to meet one of our drivers whose Peterbilt had thrown a belt the night before. 2 deputies from the sheriff's office were in the back booth talking low, but not low enough. At first, I only caught fragments. Off the old wolf pen trail. Girl's alive, barely. Says it wasn't a man. I didn't think much of it until the waitress topped off my coffee and muttered, "They found that Blevins girl tore all to pieces up near Story Creek." That got my attention. Everybody around there knew the Blevins family. Not well, exactly, but in the county way. You knew where they lived, what kind of truck they drove, which church they went to, and how long it had been since the oldest son got popped for pills. Emily Blevins was 19, pretty in the plain local way, worked part-time at a gas station in Mina, and posted too many filtered selfies online. The kind of girl older men called sweet, and younger men mistook for simple because she was polite. "What happened?" I asked. The waitress made a face like she regretted bringing it up. "She said some animal attacked her." "Bear?" She snorted. "No bear around here did what I heard it did." I should have let it go.
Instead, I spent the rest of the morning thinking about it while I changed belts in the cold mud beside a dead truck. And by lunch, I had heard 3 versions already. In one, Emily had been snatched by a wild man covered in black hair. In another, it was a feral person living in a cave near Murder Creek. In the third, and most common, it was a thing people around the diner had already started calling the Wolf Man. By the time I got back to Mina that evening, the county Facebook pages were full of it. Nobody posted names because the sheriff had asked for privacy, but that only made people more certain of the details. People always get more confident as they get less accurate. There were comments from church women promising prayers, comments from gun nuts saying they'd go bag the thing themselves, and comments from the usual freaks asking if anyone had found footprints. I wasn't interested in any of that. What interested me was that sometime around 3 that afternoon, my cousin Dale called and asked if I had any free time Saturday. Dale was 2 years older than me, broad through the shoulders, shaved head, wore old camo jackets year-round, whether he was hunting or not. He did tree work and odd jobs, and every deer season he acted like God had invented November specifically for him. He also had a bad habit of hearing one weird thing in the woods and deciding it was either a mountain lion, a government experiment, or a sign the end times were near. "You hear what happened up by Story?" he asked. "Everybody's heard." "Well, Deputy Wren organized a search. They need volunteers that actually know the ground, not just yahoos from town. You in?" I should have said no. I had work Monday. I hate group searches because half the people involved treat it like a social event and the other half treat it like a military operation despite not knowing how to read a map. But Dale said something that pulled at me. "They found hair," he said. "Long black hair. But not deer, not dog. Wren said they're bringing in game and fish too." "Then let game and fish do it. That girl says it looked human." I laughed a little at that. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was feeling something colder. Everybody says weird stuff after trauma. "Maybe," he said. Then he lowered his voice. "But her daddy said she won't stop screaming when men with beards come in the room." That sat with me. Saturday morning, I met Dale at a Shell station outside Mount Ida, where he filled his thermos with burnt coffee and bought 2 sausage biscuits wrapped in foil. We headed west in his old F250, the one with mismatched doors and a cracked windshield he kept swearing he'd replace. He had his 30-30 in the rack, an orange vest on the seat, and one of those old handheld radios clipped to his jacket. The farther we drove, the emptier it got. That part of Arkansas fools people from out of state. They hear Arkansas and picture flat country, Walmart parking lots, maybe swamp. But the Ouachitas can feel old and private in a way that makes your chest tighten. Ridge after ridge of timber and rock, roads folding into hollers where you can drive 10 miles without seeing another person. There are places out there where a body would vanish so completely it might as well have been eaten by the earth itself. The search staging area was an old gravel turnout near a trailhead sign half shot up with bullet holes. There were maybe a dozen vehicles already there. Sheriff's Tahoes, a game and fish truck, 2 side-by-sides, and several pickups with coolers in the beds and blaze orange hats on the dashboards.
Deputy Wren was there, talking to the volunteers. Mid-40s, lean, tired eyes. One of those men who never seems impressed by anything because he spent too long around human stupidity. I knew him slightly. Everyone did. He gave us the briefing. Emily Blevins had gone off a pull-off road on Thursday afternoon looking for her younger brother's arrow. They'd been shooting cheap target tips into a foam deer in a clearing near the edge of the woods, and the kid had launched one wild. Emily walked in to find it and didn't come back. Her father found her maybe 2 hours later, naked from the waist down, face swollen, skull fractured in 2 places, one arm broken, deep tearing wounds across her stomach and thighs. A doctor in Mina had stabilized her before they airlifted her to Little Rock. "What kind of tears?" somebody asked. Wren looked at him for a long second. "The kind that don't match a cat." That shut everyone up. He continued. No clear footprints because the ground was dry and leaf-covered. No drag marks. Some blood. Some long, dark hairs snagged on briars. Emily had been conscious long enough to say something jumped her from behind a tree, knocked her down, and got on top of her. She said it was hairy, like an animal, but shaped like a person. That last line made several volunteers shift uneasily. "Let me make this easy," Wren said. "We are not here looking for Bigfoot. We are looking for either a very disturbed man or a dangerous animal. If you find sign, you call it in. You do not engage alone unless it is to protect life. Understood?" There were nods all around. Dale leaned toward me and whispered, "That's exactly what they'd say if it was something else." I ignored him. They split us into small teams. Dale and I got paired with a game and fish officer named Benny Cole, a thick-necked guy with a trimmed beard and a sidearm riding high on his hip. He looked more like a wrestling coach than a wildlife officer, but the man moved quietly and noticed things fast, which counted for more. Our section was north of the initial attack site, toward a drainage that eventually fed down into Murder Creek. That name is real, by the way. People hear it and think it's some campfire embellishment. It isn't. The creek's been on maps longer than anyone alive. By 8:30, we were in the woods. The first few hours were ordinary enough. Cold air, wet leaf smell, occasional sun sliding through pine and oak. We moved slowly, scanning brush, creek banks, game trails, and old deer rubs. Then he found disturbed leaves here and there, but nothing that told a clear story. Once we found a patch of dark blood on a rock, old enough to have turned brown at the edges, but no body and no clear direction of travel. Then, around 10, Dale called us over. We found him near a shallow draw, standing over something caught in a bramble patch. Hair. At first glance, it looked black. Closer, it was a filthy dark brown, clumped together with dried skin at one end, like it had been ripped out by the root. The strands were coarse, longer than a dog's, shorter than a woman's, and there was a smell to it that made me recoil before I could stop myself. Not just animal, human sweat gone sour. Dirt. Old grease. The smell of someone who had not used soap in a very long time. Benny pulled on nitrile gloves and collected it in a bag. We spread out from there, working the slope in slow, overlapping passes. 20 minutes later, Benny found more sign. Stripped bones in the leaves beneath a cedar. Rabbit, maybe, or raccoon, hard to tell. The skull had been cracked open. The marrow in one long bone had been sucked or picked clean. That alone didn't mean much. Plenty of things eat ugly in the woods. But beside the bones were 2 bare footprints in the damp soil where shade had held a little moisture. Not paw prints, footprints. Human. long toes, narrow heel, deep enough to suggest a grown man. Dale stared at them and said very quietly, "What the hell?" Benny crouched and measured with his eyes. No shoes. Been here recent. I looked at the print and felt something unpleasant move under my ribs. I've seen barefoot tracks before, drunks, teenagers, people doing dumb camping stuff, but these were different. The toes were splayed wide, the ball of the foot heavily calloused, the impression of the big toe set slightly apart, like the foot had adapted to gripping uneven ground for years. That sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but once you saw them, you understood. These weren't the feet of somebody who had recently taken off boots. These were the feet of somebody who no longer needed them. Benny radioed Ren. We were told to hold position until he arrived. While we waited, I noticed the woods had gone strange around us. Not silent exactly, but careful. Birds had shut up. Even the breeze seemed to move around us instead of through us. It felt like standing in a room where someone has stopped talking just before you walk in. Deputy Wren and another volunteer reached us maybe 15 minutes later. Wren took one look at the prints and muttered something under his breath. "Could be an unhoused transient living rough," Benny said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Could be," Wren replied. "Could also be the kind of idiot that bites." That got a nervous laugh out of nobody. We pushed on. Around noon, we found the creek. Not a dramatic river, just a winding ribbon of dark water moving under sycamore roots and slabs of shale. We stopped to eat. Dale tore into jerky and crackers. Benny drank coffee from a stainless thermos. I sat on a log and looked across the water at a line of brush and rock ledges. That was when I saw it. A man crouched on the opposite bank. At least that was what I thought for the first second. He was maybe 50 yards away, kneeling at the creek with both hands in the water. His back was to us. He wore what looked like rags, or maybe layered strips of old clothing, all so dark with grime they had gone one color. His hair hung down between his shoulders in roped black mats. He moved oddly, with a stiffness in the shoulders but a fluidity in the hips and spine that made him seem half crawling even while kneeling. I nudged Benny and pointed. He went still immediately. Across the creek, the figure kept drinking. Then it turned. I'll tell you exactly what I saw, and I know how it sounds. It was a man. Not a monster, not an animal. A man. But one altered by neglect, weather, hunger, isolation, and something else harder to name. His face was hidden under hair and beard, but I saw skin through the tangles, gray-brown with dirt stretched thin over the bones. His eyes looked wrong at that distance, too pale, or maybe just reflective under the shade. Hair covered his chest, shoulders, and upper arms in such thick mats that for a second I understood how Emily, half-conscious and terrified, could have thought something inhuman was on top of her. He looked at us, not panicked, not stupid, not wild-eyed, evaluating. Then Benny stood up slowly and said, "Hey, sheriff's office, don't run. We need to talk to you." The man's head cocked. I could see his mouth moving through the beard as if he was trying to shape words he hadn't used much. Then he bolted. I have never seen a human being move like that over rough ground. He went uphill on two legs, but low, almost folded, one hand occasionally touching the earth as he tore through brush and rocks with unbelievable speed. Not supernatural speed, just the speed of something built by daily necessity rather than comfort. Dale swore and started after him before anyone could stop him. That was how the whole thing began to go bad. Benny yelled at him to hold. Wren swore over the radio. I followed because letting Dale chase a possibly violent feral man into dense woods alone was not an option. The chase went uphill, through laurel, slick leaves, and pine roots. I lost sight of the man almost immediately, but I could hear him ahead. Branches snapping, shale sliding, one burst of movement after another. Then another sound cut through it. Dale shouting. Not scared, excited. "I see him! He's heading for the ridge!" We pushed harder. My lungs were burning by the time I reached the top, and when I did, I found Dale standing near a rock outcrop with his rifle half raised, staring down into a shallow hollow on the far side. The man was there. He had backed himself against the low mouth of a cave or shelter in the rocks, chest heaving, hands up in front of him. Up close, he looked even less like a monster, and somehow more disturbing. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe late 20s, maybe 30. It was hard to tell through the beard, the filth, and the malnutrition. His hair covered much of his body, yes, but not in some impossible werewolf way. More like untreated hypertrichosis layered over years of grime. His skin beneath it was scarred, insect-bitten, and weather-broken. His feet were naked and blackened with dirt. His fingernails were thick and split. But the eyes were human, completely and horribly human. He saw the rifle and started shaking his head fast. "No," he said. His voice came out rough and unused, like rust scraped over stone. Dale had gone very still. Jesus. Benny came up beside us, weapon drawn but low. "Easy," he said. "Easy. Nobody shoot." The man looked from face to face, panting through cracked lips. Then he said another word. Hungry. Benny lowered his gun a little more. I remember feeling a wave of relief so sudden it almost made me laugh. It was ridiculous. We had spent hours building this thing into a legend in our heads. And here he was, a starving, frightened man living in a hole in the woods. A human tragedy, nothing more. I wish that had been the truth. What happened over the next 2 hours is the part that gets told in the clean version, the one local people prefer because it makes the story feel wrapped up. We coaxed the man out with food from our packs. He snatched jerky from Benny's hand like a striking dog, then flinched so hard he nearly fell when Benny moved too quickly. He understood more than he could speak. Simple words mostly. Water, food, no, hurt, sleep. He gave no name. When Wren got up there and saw him, the whole operation shifted. He radioed for medical support, then for county social services, then, because he was thinking 3 steps ahead, for backup. Nobody knew yet if this man had attacked Emily or if he had simply been living near where someone else did. I stood off to one side, watching him eat crackers in tiny, desperate bites. And I remember thinking how badly the world had failed him. Then he looked at me. Not my face, my hands. My right hand still had grease under 2 fingernails from work Friday. For some reason, his eyes fixed on that, and a tremor went through him. He made a sound low in his throat and started backing toward the cave again. "Hey," I said softly. "It's okay." He shook his head harder. Then, with real effort, he forced out 3 words. "Not me. Him." Benny heard it too. "Who?" The man's whole body tightened. He looked past us, not at us, at the trees. That was the first warning. The second came a heartbeat later when something crashed through brush uphill behind the cave. I spun so fast my boot slipped on loose rock. A man burst from the tree line carrying a shovel. Not a stick, not a rifle. A square-point digging shovel, swung two-handed like a bat. He hit the feral man across the side of the head so hard the sound cracked through the hollow like a gunshot. Blood sprayed the rock. The man we had just fed dropped instantly, body folding sideways in a twitching heap. For one frozen second, none of us moved, because the human brain cannot pivot that fast from pity to murder. Then all four of us shouted at once. The attacker was big, maybe late 40s, beard gone mostly gray, denim jacket, mud-caked work boots. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with the kind of frantic hatred that doesn't come from fear. It comes from ownership being threatened. Before I could process that, he swung the shovel again. This time Benny fired. One shot. Missed or grazed, I don't know. The man lunged backward into the brush, slipping down slope. Dale fired too late, splintering bark where the attacker had been a second before. Then the woods erupted with movement. Someone else crashing away downhill, another figure, smaller, vanishing between the trees. "There's two!" Wren yelled. I dropped to my knees beside the man from the cave. Blood was pouring from his scalp, black in his hair. His skull had split open above the ear, and I could see white bone through the red. His eye rolled toward me wildly. His mouth opened and shut around nothing. I slapped trauma gauze against the wound and shouted for Benny. He was already there, cursing, calling for EMS over the radio. The man's fingers clamped onto my wrist with shocking strength. His breath smelled rotten, not just from neglect, but from damaged teeth and infection. He pulled me closer until his beard brushed my sleeve, and he whispered, "Cellar." Then he convulsed once and went limp. I wish I could tell you he lived. He didn't. The medics pronounced him dead before they even got him fully onto the litter. After that, the day turned from a search into a manhunt. The attack changed everything. If there had been any doubt that Emily's attacker was a human predator, that doubt evaporated. A feral man living rough in the woods had just been bludgeoned nearly to death in front of law enforcement by someone desperate to silence him. That meant the real story was worse. Way worse. The hollow and cave got locked down. Wren called in state investigators. More deputies arrived. So did dogs. Dale kept pacing and muttering, trying to convince himself he'd only missed the first shot because the angle was bad. Benny sat on a rock with blood on his sleeve and didn't speak for maybe 10 minutes straight. Eventually, Wren pulled me aside. "You heard him say something?" I nodded. "What?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to say it, but because even then the word felt melodramatic. "Cellar." Wren's eyes narrowed. "That all?" "That's all." He stared back toward the dead man's shelter. "There's no structure on the topo nearby except an old hunting cabin west of here. Been abandoned 20 years. Maybe not abandoned." He looked at me like he had already thought the same thing. By 4 that afternoon, they had trackers working several drainages. One set of prints, boots, not bare feet, led generally west from the attack site. Another, smaller set, moved with them off and on, sometimes disappearing where someone had ridden in a vehicle or on an ATV. There was also a weird scattering of other evidence that, in retrospect, feels like the forest trying to tell us the truth all day while we kept insisting on folklore. A burned bone in an old fire ring, a woman's sweatshirt hanging high in a cedar, beer cans in a root hollow, a rusted dog chain bolted to a tree. A child's sneaker buried under leaves. At sunset, they suspended the ground chase until morning. That should have been the end of my involvement. It almost was. I gave my statement at the sheriff's substation near Mount Ida, washed blood off my hands in a stained sink that smelled like iron and soap, and sat in my truck for 20 minutes with the engine running and the heater on full, trying not to think about the man's skull opening under that shovel. Then Dale knocked on my window. He looked pale, which on him meant something. "Wren wants us," he said. "For what?" "They found the cabin." It wasn't a question of whether I should go. Officially, I shouldn't have. Civilians should have stayed out of it at that point. But local sheriffs work with the people they know, and there were only so many men available who knew the unmarked roads in that patch of timber. Benny was going. Dale was going. Wren asked if I could guide one of the trucks down a logging spur I'd used years ago for a recovery job. So just after dark, against every better instinct I possessed, I followed 2 sheriff's Tahoes and a game and fish truck up a washed-out road into the western ridges above Murder Creek. The cabin wasn't on any maintained track. It sat in a fold of terrain you would never notice unless you were looking for it, hidden behind second-growth timber and a line of cedars. No lights showed from the outside when we parked 100 yards off and approached on foot. At first, it looked like any old hunting place gone to seed. Single-story log structure, sagging porch, corrugated roof patched with tar, lean-to shed on one side, an old Ford pickup beside it with no plates, animal bones hanging from hooks under the eaves. Only when I got closer did I see those weren't all animal. One of them was a human hand, dried almost black, wired through the wrist and swinging slowly in the night breeze. I recoiled so hard I almost stumbled into Dale behind me. That was the moment the whole scene changed in my head from criminal to obscene. Wren gave the hand signal and the deputies moved in. The front door came off the hinges after one ram. What followed happened fast and in splinters. A shotgun blast from inside. Return fire. Men shouting. Somebody crashing through the back. Dale and I went left around the porch, while Benny and 2 deputies took the right. I heard glass explode. Heard a woman scream once from somewhere behind the cabin. Then a figure burst from the back door, low and fast, colliding with Benny so hard both of them went down in the mud. The figure was young, male, thin but wiry, matted hair, barefoot. For one insane second, I thought it was another feral victim. Then he brought a knife up from beneath himself and drove it toward Benny's throat. I fired. Once. The shot hit him in the ribs or side. He jerked, rolled off Benny, and tried to crawl. Benny got his sidearm free and ended it 2 seconds later. Up close, the kid couldn't have been older than 22. Not feral, not wild, just filthy, strung out, and smiling through blood around broken teeth as he died. That smile is one of the things that still returns to me in dreams. Inside the cabin, they found the older attacker from the hollow dead on the kitchen floor, half his face blown away after refusing to drop the shotgun. They also found a woman in the back room, alive, barely. She was chained by one ankle to an iron bed frame, naked under a filthy sleeping bag, bruised to the point her skin looked marbled black, blue, green, and yellow. Her left breast had been cut in 2 places. Her lips were split. One ear was half missing. There were ligature grooves around both wrists and bite marks along her thigh, shoulder, and stomach, some old, some fresh. When Deputy Wren crouched by her and said, "Ma'am, you're safe now," she started sobbing so hard she vomited bile down the front of the bag. I wish the story got easier there. It didn't. The back room connected to a pantry. The pantry connected to a trapdoor under a rug. And under the trapdoor was the cellar. I have seen mangled people in wrecks, burn victims, sawmill accidents, a roofer who fell onto a chain-link fence and split himself open in ways no body is meant to open. But nothing in my life prepared me for that cellar. Concrete steps, low ceiling, a bare bulb hanging from a twisted cord, shelves lined with jars, a steel table in the middle with leather straps bolted to it, hooks in the rafters. The walls were streaked brown-black almost to shoulder height, and along one side, arranged with the ugly care of a collector, were bones, human bones, skulls on shelves, jawbones threaded with baling wire, vertebrae stacked in coffee cans, finger bones sorted into mason jars, a femur sawed clean through and hollowed out, maybe for marrow, maybe for something worse. There were Polaroids too, some curled with age, some newer, showing people tied up, injured, dead, or in the process of becoming dead. The smell down there was impossible to separate into parts. Blood, piss, mold, bleach, rot, old meat, and that sweet, greasy stench decomposition leaves in walls long after the bodies are gone. I only made it 3 steps into the room before I bent over and threw up. Behind me, one deputy swore so violently it sounded like prayer in reverse. Someone found a child's skull. That detail leaked, and people argued online later about whether it had been planted, misidentified, or fabricated for attention. It wasn't. I saw it. Small enough to fit in 2 hands. A fracture running through the left orbit. 3 baby teeth still in the jaw. There was also a ledger. That, more than anything, convinced me those men were not simply killers or opportunists. They had built a system. Dates, notes, initials, vehicle descriptions. Little remarks like, "Woman alone, Nevada plates," or "Old man, no cash but good rifle." They had been using those woods like a menu. The feral man from the cave was in that ledger too. Not by name, just Wolf Boy. That line made Benny sit down on the cellar steps and put both hands over his face. The theory investigators eventually pieced together, and I believe it's right, is this. Years earlier, maybe as far back as the late 1990s, someone abandoned a child in those woods. Or a child escaped abuse and stayed hidden there long enough to become something between human and scavenger. The men in the cabin, father and son at first, later with others drifting in and out, found him, fed him sometimes, beat him often, used him as a boogeyman and sometimes as bait. When local livestock went missing, when campers found strange tracks, when girls whispered about something hairy in the tree line, it helped the myth. It kept people looking the wrong direction. Over time, the feral man became their camouflage. He was the monster. They were just men. As for Emily Blevins, the truth was worse than rumor, but smaller than legend. The older man in the cabin had attacked her. He'd been watching from the woods while she searched for her brother's arrow. He was wearing an old ghillie top for deer season, a homemade thing layered with strips of burlap, dark twine, deer hair, and filth. From the front, tackling her out of brush, half seen through trauma and blood, he would have looked like a hairy creature. He beat her when she fought, tried to rape her, then fled when he heard her father yelling in the distance. The feral man may have been nearby. There was evidence he had followed the attacker afterward, maybe even scavenged the scene, which only deepened the confusion. That was the official explanation. It accounted for almost everything. Almost. What it did not explain was why on the second day after the raid, a volunteer searcher found the younger attacker's body again after it had already been bagged for transport. That sounds impossible, so let me say it more clearly. The boy I shot behind the cabin had been placed in a body bag beside the gravel drive while the scene was processed. Deputies signed the chain of custody paperwork. Multiple people saw him there. Then, during a temporary power failure caused by a generator issue, someone screamed outside. When they brought lights back, the bag near the drive was empty. The body was found 40 minutes later in a gully 70 yards downhill, half under leaves, one leg bent beneath it as if it had crawled there. The zipper on the bag had been torn open from the inside or cut from the outside, accounts differ. His throat had been opened wider than the autopsy wound pattern could explain, and chunks of tissue were missing from the cheek and shoulder. Maybe an animal got to him. Maybe one of the deputies mishandled something, and the story grew in retelling. Maybe trauma and darkness make fools of memory. Maybe. But one of the investigators later told Benny, after too much bourbon and no sleep, that there were barefoot tracks around the body. One set, not matching the dead boy. Long toes, narrow heel. The same kind we had found by the stripped bones near the creek. The county tried to keep the whole thing quiet after that. Officially, the case became about the cabin killers and their victims. Easier to prosecute what remained, easier to explain to the public, easier for the Blevins family too. Nobody wanted folklore mixed in with rape and murder. Nobody wanted the local news saying "wild man" every 20 minutes like it was entertainment. Emily survived, though she left Arkansas within a year. The woman in the cabin survived too, barely. I never learned her full story, only that she had been reported missing from Oklahoma after her car was found near a scenic overlook with a flat tire. I think about her more than I'd like. About how close the cabin had been to roads families drove every weekend to look at leaves. Deputy Wren retired 2 years later. Benny transferred counties. Dale sold his .30-30 and stopped hunting alone. As for me, I still work on diesel engines, though I don't take service calls anywhere near Murder Creek anymore. I don't care how much the company offers. I'll quit first. People still tell versions of the story around Polk County, usually after a few beers, always with confidence. They say there was a wolf man. They say he lived in a cave and drank from streams and ate raw squirrels. They say he attacked girls. They say deputies shot him dead because they couldn't cage him. That's the version small towns prefer, because it keeps evil simple. A monster in the woods, not the truth. The truth is that the thing everybody feared was real, but it wasn't the thing doing the worst of it. The feral man existed. I saw him. I heard him talk. I held his blood on my hands while it ran hot through trauma gauze and cooled in the fall air. He was terrifying to look at, yes, especially the first time by the creek with his matted hair and those pale eyes. But terror and guilt are not the same thing. He was a human being who had been turned into a rumor so other men could do what they wanted under cover of it. And that part has stayed with me worse than the gore, worse than the cellar, worse than the child's skull or the Polaroids or the smell that came up from under that trap door. Because that part is real in a deeper way. People do this all the time. They build a creature out of someone broken, strange, dirty, poor, sick, mentally gone, or abandoned. Then they point to it and say, "There's the monster. There's the danger. There's what you should fear." Meanwhile, the real predators are standing in kitchens, pumping gas, smiling at church, buying feed, waving from pickups, asking if you need help with your flat. I still dream about the hollow sometimes. The man from the creek is there every time, crouched in the mouth of the cave with cracker crumbs in his beard, trying to make words out of a mouth that forgot how to use them. Sometimes I hear the shovel before it swings. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes, just before impact, he looks past me toward the trees and says the word again. Cellar. And every time I wake up before dawn feeling like I missed the obvious. Like the woods tried to tell us, with bones, hair, footprints, and silence. And we kept insisting on legends, because legends are easier to survive than men. I haven't been back to that part of the forest. I never will. But once, about 6 months after the raid, I had to drive through Mount Ida on a service call, and I stopped at that same diner off the highway for coffee. The same waitress was there. Same cracked booths. Same mounted antlers over the pie case. An old man at the counter was telling somebody about the Wolf Man of Murder Creek, like it was a ghost story. I listened for a minute, then paid my check and left. Out in the parking lot, there was a pickup I didn't recognize. Muddy, dark green, hunting stickers in the back window. And hanging from the mirror, catching the morning light, was a braided little charm made from coarse black hair. I stood there too long staring at it. Then a man's voice behind me said, "You all right, buddy?" I turned so fast I nearly swung on him. It was just the owner. Mid-30s, camo jacket, coffee in hand, confused at my expression. I muttered something and got in my truck. As I pulled out, I told myself the charm could have been deer tail, horsehair, synthetic cord, anything. But when I checked my rear view, the man was still standing by the diner door, watching me leave. And the thing on his mirror was turning slowly in the wind, like it was alive. Story 3. I was the only one who walked away from the crash, and I wish I had died there. My name is Daniel Kerr. I'm 41 years old, and I live in Spokane, Washington. For most of the last decade, I worked contract environmental compliance jobs, mostly boring, necessary stuff. Water sampling near old mine sites, soil testing around abandoned industrial properties, occasional survey support for timber and utility companies that needed someone willing to hike into remote parcels, document runoff, and come back with photographs nobody looked at unless there was a lawsuit. It is not exciting work. It is paperwork with mud on it. That's why, when I tell people what happened to me in northern Idaho in October of 2021, they assume I'm exaggerating. They hear remote woods, small plane, missing people, and they think I'm trying to turn a field assignment into a campfire story. I'm not. I'd give anything for this to be a lie. At the time, I was subcontracting through a firm out of Coeur d'Alene. The job was simple on paper. An old silver prospect above the St. Joe backcountry had some drainage issues, and the Forest Service wanted updated documentation before winter locked the roads down. The site was accessible by a long, ugly drive if the weather held, but a consultant from Boise had already decided it would be more efficient to charter a small plane into a rough landing strip near a decommissioned fire lookout, then have us hike the last few miles. That was red flag number 1. Anybody who says something is more efficient in the backcountry usually means more dangerous, but I don't have to do it myself. There were 4 of us supposed to go up. Me, a hydrologist named Megan Tate from Missoula, a survey tech named Luis Ortega out of Yakima, and the pilot, Walt Henning, a leathery old man in his 60s who looked like he'd been carved out of dry cedar and yellowed by nicotine. We met in St. Mary's the night before and stayed at a motel that smelled like stale carpet and fryer grease. Across the road was one of those old highway diners with pie under glass and a coffee pot that never had time to cool. I remember that part too clearly because it was the last ordinary evening of my life. Walt drank decaf because his doctor had apparently become a tyrant. Luis ate chicken fried steak and joked about the landing strip sounding less like a work site and more like the setup for a Dateline episode. Megan had a habit of folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares while she talked. She was 32, smart, dry sense of humor, and one of those people who made competence look casual. "Forecast says fog burns off by 10, she said, looking at her phone. "Then just high clouds." Walt grunted. "Forecast says a lot of things." I asked him if the strip was safe. He shrugged in that pilot way I later learned means safe enough that I'm willing to gamble on it. "Short but usable," he said, "as long as nobody's left a truck parked on it." That got a laugh out of Luis. It didn't get one out of Walt. Later, when we were paying, the woman at the register asked where we were headed. When Walt told her, she frowned. "You all going up by Black Elk Spur?" she asked. Walt nodded once. She wiped her hands on her apron and said, "A deputy was in here this morning asking if anybody'd seen a red Tacoma with Montana plates. Guy's been overdue since Tuesday." Luis said, "Hunter?" "Probably," she replied. "They always say Hunter at first." I remember the way she said it, because it felt like a sentence with rot inside it. They always say Hunter at first. The next morning, we fueled at a little municipal strip outside town. It was barely more than a shack, a windsock, and a row of chain-link fence separating the tarmac from wet grass. The plane was a battered de Havilland Beaver on floats converted to wheels, old, ugly, and supposedly reliable in the way old working machines sometimes are right up until the minute they kill you. I've been in enough small aircraft to know when a pilot is relaxed and when he's pretending to be relaxed for the passengers. Walt fell into the second category. He made 2 extra walkarounds, checked the left wheel assembly twice, swore under his breath when one latch on the cargo compartment didn't catch the first time. By then I should have said I wasn't going. I didn't. I loaded the cooler, the case of sample bottles, and my pack. Luis secured the survey rods. Megan climbed in beside me with a legal pad, a trauma kit, and one of those gray insulated coffee tumblers that leak no matter what brand claims otherwise. We took off just after 9:30. For the first 40 minutes, it was beautiful. That's the cruel thing about disaster in the mountains. It almost always starts in scenery so pretty it makes you feel lucky for being alive. Pines running black over ridge lines, bands of yellow larch, creeks flashing silver where the sun hit them. Old logging roads like pale scars winding into folds of country nobody should have bothered carving. Walt wore a headset and pointed things out occasionally over the engine noise. "That drainage there feeds Marble Creek. Old burn scar on the north face. Strips beyond that ridge." The clouds started building faster than forecast had promised. Thin at first, then thicker. The kind of shifting gray that makes every distance estimate wrong. Turbulence kicked in. Nothing dramatic, just enough to bump your teeth together and keep your shoulders tense. Megan looked out the window and said, "Tell me if this is the part where an NTSB report begins with, 'Weather conditions deteriorated unexpectedly.'" Walt didn't answer. That was when I first got uneasy. 10 minutes later, the engine coughed. Just once. If you've ever been in a small aircraft, you know every passenger hears engine trouble before the pilot admits it exists. It's like hearing a bad breath in a sleeping person's chest. A tiny thing, but all at once your body knows it matters. Luis looked up immediately. So did Megan. Walt adjusted something, eyes forward. Probably fuel flow hiccup. Nobody said anything after that. 2 minutes later, it coughed again. Longer. The plane shuddered. The sound came through the frame, not just the engine. An ugly, mechanical choking that seemed to make the whole fuselage flex around us. Walt's voice changed. That is one of the details I remember most clearly. His voice had been rough but normal all morning. Then it flattened into professional calm. "Seatbelts tight," he said. "Stay down after impact." Luis said, "What?" Walt didn't answer him. The engine screamed once, then dropped into a horrible, uneven roar. Trees were suddenly too close. The ridge we should have cleared filled the windshield. Walt banked hard left. My shoulder slammed Megan's. Loose gear crashed in back. Something metal broke free and banged wildly against the cargo net. Then we hit. I don't mean we landed hard. I mean we hit the forest. The first impact felt sideways. The wing clipped timber with a crunch like a whole room splintering. The second was head-on. Glass burst. The nose slammed downward. My harness locked so hard it crushed the air out of me. The third impact was the worst because that was when everything stopped moving forward and started coming apart. There are things the body does during real terror that sound fake when described later. Time doesn't slow down. That's movie nonsense. It fragments. You get tiny, perfect details, separated by blanks you can't cross. I remember Megan's coffee exploding across the inside of the windshield like brown rain. I remember Luis shouting something in Spanish right before the overhead panel collapsed. I remember seeing a branch spear through where Walt's side window had been. I remember the smell: fuel, hot oil, pine sap, dirt, and blood all arriving at once. Then I was upside down. Or the plane was. It took me a second to understand I was conscious. My right ear rang so hard I thought I'd gone deaf on that side. Blood ran into one eye. I couldn't move my left leg at first and was sure it had snapped. Then I flexed my foot and pain shot all the way to my hip, but the leg worked. That felt like a miracle. "Luis?" I said. No answer. "Megan?" Nothing. The cockpit had collapsed inward. Walt was still in his seat, but the upper half of his skull was gone. Pine needles clung to the blood sprayed across the shattered instrument cluster. Something white and gelatinous hung from the edge of the seat behind him. I looked at it for one dumb, stunned second before I realized it was part of his brain. I wish I could tell you shock made that easier. It doesn't. It just postpones it. Luis was twisted under a collapsed section of frame, neck at an angle no living neck keeps. Megan was hanging half sideways in her harness, face gray with dust and blood. I thought she was dead too until she made a sound. Not a word, just a wet, painful breath. I got my belt off and dropped hard onto the roof, or floor, or whatever it was then. My shoulder lit up white hot. I crawled over broken plexiglass and bent metal toward her. Her abdomen had taken the worst of it. A piece of torn aluminum or internal framing had punched through her lower side and then snapped away, leaving a hole the size of a fist. Her jacket was soaked black. When I got close enough, I could hear air bubbling softly in the blood. "Daniel," she whispered. "I'm here." "Luis?" I looked once and then back at her. No. She understood immediately. That was the part that ruined me. Not the gore, not the smell. The understanding in her face. 1 second of a person realizing exactly how alone they are. I got her harness loose as carefully as I could. She screamed anyway. It wasn't loud, more like a torn animal sound forced through clenched teeth. I used my belt and gauze from the trauma kit to bind her side, packed the wound as best I could, and tried not to think about whether I was just rearranging the blood on her body. We were in a narrow cut below the ridge, wedged among broken trunks and shredded brush. One wing had torn off farther upslope. The tail section sat nearly vertical between two trees. Fuel dripped steadily somewhere behind us. I dragged Megan clear of the wreck because I knew enough to fear fire. Then went back for whatever I could salvage. Water, flares, my pack, her pack, one emergency blanket, a satellite messenger that had been crushed but maybe not completely destroyed, half a box of protein bars, a folding saw, my headlamp, her trauma kit. The radio was dead. My phone had no service. Of course it didn't. I hit the SOS on the satellite device until my thumb cramped. No confirmation. Just a dim, flashing light I chose to interpret as hope because the alternative was panic. Megan drifted in and out while I worked. Pale, sweating, teeth chattering even before the cold really set in. "We stay put," I told her. "They'll look for the plane." She swallowed blood from a cut inside her lip and managed a tiny nod. Then, after maybe 15 minutes, she gripped my sleeve and whispered, "Do you hear that?" At first I thought she meant the ticking wreck or the fuel drip. Then I heard it too. A sound moving through the trees below us. Not voices, not an engine. Metal clinking, slow, irregular, like chain or tools knocking together with each step. I stood up immediately and drew the pistol from my pack. I carried it in the field more out of habit than expectation. Black bears, cougars, the occasional meth head on federal land. Until that moment, it had never felt like anything but insurance. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing moved below the crash site except branches lifting gently in the wind. Maybe it was debris settling. Maybe. I almost believed that until I found the first footprint. It was in a patch of damp soil beside a downed log 20 yards from where I'd laid Megan. A boot print. Large. Deep. Fresh enough to still hold a sharp heel edge. It wasn't mine. I knew that immediately because I was wearing Solomon's with a distinct tread, and this was some kind of lugged work boot. Someone had already been there. Not rescue. Not us. Someone else. I scanned the trees so hard my eyes watered. No movement. No voices. No orange vest. No engine. Just the sudden sickening understanding that we were not the first people to find the crash. I got Megan behind the largest fallen trunk I could find and covered both of us with branches and the emergency blanket, silver side down. It wasn't perfect concealment, but from even 30 yards away it broke up the human shape. "Why?" she whispered. "Because somebody's here." Her eyes widened, then tightened with pain. "Rescue?" I didn't answer quickly enough. That told her no. We waited until the light started thinning toward evening. No one approached. No more chain sounds. No voices. Once I thought I saw someone moving through the timber downslope, but it could have been shadow and nerves. By 6, it was clear no helicopter was coming before dark. I made the decision then that still haunts me because I don't know if it saved me or doomed her. There was no dry ground at the wreck. No shelter except twisted aluminum full of fumes, and temperatures were dropping fast. Megan needed warmth, water, and real medical care. I needed help. and I needed it before whoever had walked through that site decided to come back. The map in my head told me there should have been an old Forest Service road, 2, maybe 3 miles west of the ridge. If I could reach it, I might find a gate, a radio repeater, a trailhead, anything. I didn't want to leave her. She saw that on my face. "Go," she said. "I can't." "You can. If you stay, I die slower." That is one of the last clear things she ever said to me. I left her my extra water, the trauma kit, the headlamp, 1 flare, and the pistol with 1 magazine. I kept the satellite device, my knife, and the folding saw. Then I tucked the blanket around her and marked the crash site on my offline map with hands that would not stop shaking. "Shoot if anyone comes close," I told her. She gave me a look that was almost annoyed. No kidding. I started downhill at 6:22 p.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch twice before I could accept I was really doing it. The first hour was miserable but manageable. Steep timber, deadfall, loose shale under duff. I moved west by compass and the dim contour sense you build after enough years in rough country. The woods were thick enough that darkness arrived early. My headlamp cut only a narrow tunnel between the trees. I was maybe a mile from the crash when I found the first body. At first, I thought it was a bear carcass caught in brush. Then the beam hit denim. The man was wedged face down between 2 roots at the edge of a shallow draw. One arm was folded under him. The other reached outward, as if he had died crawling. He wore a camouflage jacket, jeans, and 1 orange hunting glove. The back of his head had been opened to the skull. I don't mean cut. Opened. Like something had struck him there, hard enough to split bone and scalp in a wet, ragged seam. White cranial fragments glimmered among the matted hair. Flies were already in it, despite the cold. I backed away so fast, I tripped over a root and landed on my ass. His rifle lay 3 feet away, with the sling snapped. Beside him was a pack, torn open, its contents spilled through the leaves. Beef jerky, a flashlight, extra shells, a folded paper map, a length of rope, a little Ziploc bag of ibuprofen. I took the map. I did not take the rifle because my hands were shaking too hard to trust myself with an unfamiliar long gun in the dark. That was a mistake. At the time, it felt rational. Keep moving. Find help. Don't get bogged down by the dead. I went another half mile before I heard the radio. It came through the trees so suddenly I almost fired at the darkness. Static first, then a voice. "Copy that, Walt? You on the strip yet?" A man's voice, crackly and thin from distance, then silence. Then another voice, closer this time, and not on a radio at all. "You hear that?" I dropped flat behind a rotted log so fast pine needles went into my mouth. Boots moved somewhere uphill from me. Not 1 pair, at least 2. Another man answered, close enough now that I could hear the wetness in his breathing. "Maybe from the crash." Crash. My whole body went cold. A flashlight beam passed through branches 20 yards ahead, white and searching. The first man said, "If any of them walked, they won't get far." The second gave a short laugh. "Neither did the Tacoma guy." I stayed face down in the dirt and did not breathe until the light moved away. It took every bit of control I had not to run right then. Running makes noise. Noise gets you followed. I waited until the boots had faded down slope, then turned 90 degrees north and climbed instead of continuing west. I no longer cared about the road as much as I cared about not leading whoever those men were back to Megan. It got colder, fast. Real mountain cold, damp and penetrating. Around 8:30, I found a little shelf of rock under a dead snag and stopped long enough to eat half a protein bar and listen. That was when I heard the scream. Far behind me, female. One burst, cut off. It came from the direction of the crash. I told myself it might not be Megan. I still tell myself that sometimes. It has never once sounded convincing. I didn't go back. People judge that when I tell it. I understand why, but hear me clearly. I was alone, lost, unsteady from the crash, and now I knew there were at least 2 men in those woods hunting survivors. If I went back down there in the dark, I would not have saved her. I would have died near her. Maybe that would have been more honorable. It would not have changed anything. I walked most of the night. Once, around 10, I crossed what looked like an old spur road overgrown with alder. I followed it for 20 minutes until I found a rusted gate hanging open and the remains of a sign too weathered to read. That should have been good news. Instead, the road ended at a clearing full of stripped vehicles. At least 6 of them. A side-by-side with no wheels. 2 pickups burned to shells. A camper trailer collapsed on itself. 1 white Subaru sunk to the axles in weeds. None of them had plates. Most had windows smashed out and interiors gutted. The place smelled like oil, rust, and old fire. There were bones there too. Animal mostly, I told myself, until I saw a lower jaw with dental fillings lying beside a tire rim. I left that clearing at a run. Close to midnight, I saw light. Not a highway, not a search chopper. Just one pale square through trees below me. A structure. I watched it for 5 full minutes before moving. No visible vehicles, no generator noise, no voices. Just a dim yellow glow, steady and low, like a lantern or 1 weak bulb. I approached from downhill, using brush for cover. It was a Forest Service cabin or old ranger station, maybe from the 50s. 1 story with a sagging porch and a corrugated roof. There was a radio mast behind it, half fallen. A green pickup sat off to the side with a tarp over the bed. No plates. I almost turned around then. Then I saw the blood on the porch steps, fresh enough to shine in the lamplight. I don't know why I still went up. Exhaustion maybe, desperation. The insane hope that maybe someone inside needed help and also had a working radio. The front door stood ajar by 2 inches. I pushed it with the barrel of the pistol. The smell hit first. Wood smoke, bleach, old food, wet dog, and something sweet sour underneath, like rotten meat scrubbed badly. "Hello?" I called. No answer. The main room looked lived in but wrong. Not home wrong, camp wrong. Dirty sleeping bags, canned food, muddy boots, a propane lantern on a crate, a deer quarter hanging from a hook near the sink, though the meat had gone gray at the edges and flies worried it in the warmth. There was a CB radio on the table. There was also a sheriff's deputy handcuffed to a chair. His uniform shirt was torn, 1 sleeve soaked dark. His nose had been broken recently enough that blood still crusted the mustache above his lip. Both eyes snapped to me the second I stepped in. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Untie me." I crossed the room in 3 strides. "What happened?" "Name's Croft," he said quickly. "Shoshone County. They ambushed us on the road. There were 3 of us." "Who?" He laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Local ghosts, apparently." His wrists were zip-tied to the chair frame so tight the skin had gone purple above the cuffs. I cut him loose with my knife. He stood too fast, staggered, caught the table, and sucked air through his teeth. "There's more?" I asked. He nodded toward the back hall. That was all he needed to do. I knew. Some part of me had known since the blood on the porch. The back room held another deputy on the floor, with his throat open so deeply I could see the glistening white curve of trachea under the blood. He'd been dead long enough for the pooling to go tacky. A piece of his ear was stuck to the floorboard near the wall. There was also a civilian man in hunting camo, belly down, hands wired behind his back, with the back of his skull caved in and brains dried black into the cracks between the planks. And in the corner, under a horse blanket, was a woman. At first, I thought she was dead too. Then she moved. Her hands were bound in front with extension cord. Her mouth had been wrapped with duct tape so many times it pulled the skin at the corners of her lips raw. One eye was swollen closed. The other fixed on me with a terror so absolute it barely looked human. Her shirt had been cut open. Across her sternum and ribs were shallow knife marks, some crossing older scars. Nothing fatal, just deliberate. Croft tore the tape off her mouth while I cut the cord from her wrists. She inhaled once, ragged and huge, then vomited watery bile onto the floor. "How many?" Croft asked her. "3, she whispered. "Maybe 4. They left one outside earlier." My skin prickled. Left one? She stared at me like I was stupid for not knowing. Watching. That was when something hit the cabin wall from outside. Hard. Bang! We all froze. Then came another impact from the backside. Bang! Croft moved fast for an injured man. He grabbed the shotgun leaning by the stove, checked it, and said, "Lights." I killed the lantern. The room dropped into near black except for moonlight leaking through curtains. Another blow hit the wall, closer to a window this time. Then the sound of boots on the porch. A man outside called, cheerful as a neighbor borrowing a wrench. "Sheriff, you still with us in there?" No one answered. He laughed softly. "We got your other one hanging by the road if you want him back." The woman beside me made a strangled sound. Croft leaned close and whispered, "Back window. Go now." "We can't leave you," I said. "You can and you will." He shoved extra shells into my coat pocket so hard they bruised my chest. From outside came the squeal of metal against glass as someone dragged a knife or screwdriver across the pane. "Come on," the voice said. "Open up." Croft aimed the shotgun at the front door. His face had gone completely flat. To this day, I don't know if he thought he could hold them off or just wanted the rest of us to believe that long enough to run. I took the woman, her name I later learned was Abby, through the back room, lifted the sagging window, and half pushed, half dropped her out into blackberry and frost-hardened weeds. I followed, landing bad on my shoulder and seeing stars. The last thing I heard from inside before we ran was Croft shouting, "Sheriff's office, don't move!" Then the shotgun blast. Then 2 more shots, not his. We ran into the trees. Abby could barely move. Her bare feet were wrapped in filthy strips of sheet. Blood darkened them with every step. I held her up by the arm and steered us downhill, away from the cabin, away from the porch, away from the men who began shouting to each other seconds later. Flashlights snapped on behind us. We could not outrun them. So I stopped trying to outrun them. Instead, I got us into a creek bed,
cold black water to the ankles and moved us downstream over rock instead of leaves. Abby was shaking uncontrollably, from pain or fear or both. I kept one hand over her mouth whenever we heard voices nearby. Twice, beams passed above us through brush. Once a man stopped almost directly overhead and said, "They can't have gone far."
Another answered from somewhere to the left. "Dogs at first light if we need 'em." Dogs. I wanted to die when I heard that. Around 3 in the morning, we found an old culvert under a logging road embankment and crawled inside. It was barely tall enough to sit hunched. Cold water ran beneath us. The concrete smelled of mud and old iron. Abby curled against the wall and shook so hard her teeth clicked. I gave her my coat and asked what happened. Her story came out in pieces between shivers. She and her fiancé had been driving from Bozeman to Lewiston after his brother's wedding. They took a scenic route because the freeway bored him. Their car got a flat near a closed trailhead. A pickup stopped. 2 men offered help. That was 3 days earlier. "They took Tyler first," she said. I already knew what that meant. "He was alive when..." She stopped, tried again. "They made me listen." I didn't ask for details. There are moments when asking for completeness is just another form of cruelty. When she finally slept, I sat awake with Croft's shotgun across my knees, counting the shells in my pocket and thinking about the crash. Megan, the hunter corpse, the stripped vehicle yard, the men on the radio, and the casual, organized way these people moved through that country. This was not improvisation. This was routine. At dawn, we heard engines. Not one, several. I thought at first that it was them. Then one of the engines revved in a way no old pickup on the logging road ever would. Deep, heavy, official. Abby woke instantly, terrified, and I had to physically keep her from scrambling deeper into the culvert. I stepped out with the shotgun over my head before common sense could interfere. It was the sheriff's convoy. Real this time. 2 county units, a Forest Service truck, and an ambulance bouncing hard over the road ruts. Someone had finally gotten the crash ping, or found the strip, or followed the deputy's missing vehicle report. I don't know which. I just remember a woman deputy drawing on me until she saw Abby behind me and the blood on both of us. Then everything happened at once. Questions, blankets, hands, radios, the fast, efficient violence of rescue. I kept saying there were men in a cabin and a crash up on the ridge and a woman still there, Megan, maybe alive, maybe not. They loaded Abby into the ambulance while deputies dragged me to the road shoulder and made me sit down because apparently I kept trying to stand and point directions with a concussion. The search that followed lasted 2 days. They found the crash by noon. Megan was dead. She had fired the flare at some point in the night. They found it burned out near the wreck. They also found one spent 9mm casing beside where I'd left her, and blood trails leading away into the trees. Enough blood that the state police later told me she was almost certainly dead before they moved her. They never found the rest of her. They found Croft in the ranger cabin, dead beside the stove, with 2 gunshot wounds and a hatchet buried in his collarbone. One of the attackers lay dead near the porch, face mostly gone from a shotgun blast. Another was found in the creek below, with his throat ripped open and half his right cheek missing, though the official report called that post-mortem animal predation. They found the vehicle yard, the bones, and the cellar under the outbuilding behind the cabin. That was the real heart of it. Not the cabin, the cellar. Concrete walls, meat hooks, old restraints bolted to a workbench, human bones mixed with elk and deer remains in barrels of lime. Wallets, phones, jewelry, license plates, a child's pink backpack, 2 sheriff's badges, 3 skulls set neatly on a shelf beside a box of ammunition. One of the skulls had a hole through the forehead, with rusty wire threaded into it so it could hang. There were stains everywhere, on the floor, on the drain, up the wall behind the table. Some old enough to have gone almost black, some new enough to still shine. They recovered enough remains to tie the site to at least 7 missing persons across Idaho and western Montana over a span of 4 years. Hunters, travelers, a college kid last seen at a gas station outside Avery, a married couple whose pickup was found abandoned near a trailhead the previous winter, the red Tacoma from the diner woman's story. They had probably been doing it longer than that. 2 men were arrested alive 40 miles away after a high-speed stop on a county road near Calder. One of them had Walt's headset in the truck. The other had Luis's wedding band in his pocket. They were brothers, both from the area. One had worked seasonal fire. The other had run a guide service until too many unfortunate business problems closed it down. On paper, they looked like exactly the kind of men you'd wave at from a gas station pump and forget 2 minutes later. There was a third man the authorities never officially identified. Some drifter maybe. Maybe a cousin. Maybe not real. Depends which deputy you ask and how much he's had to drink. Here is the part I still can't explain. The man with the torn throat in the creek, the one supposedly mauled by animals after death, was missing both eyes when they found him. Not pecked out, not scavenged, removed. Clean enough that one investigator privately told me it looked almost careful. They also found bare footprints around him in the mud, heading upstream and then vanishing in rock. Not my boots, not Abby's wrapped feet, not any deputies. Bare human prints. Long, narrow, deep in the ball, toes splayed wide. The same kind they later found in the cellar dust. I know what that sounds like. Some feral survivor. Another victim gone wild. A local legend people had projected into the gaps. Maybe. I don't know. I do know one deputy told me, months later, that in the first sweep of the crash site, they found a section of Megan's bloodied thermal shirt snagged 20 yards above where I'd left her, draped over a branch at about 7 feet off the ground. Not hanging like it had blown there. Placed. He only told me because he was drunk and tired and wanted to know if I had seen anything strange on the mountain before the rescue. I lied and said no. The truth is, I had. On the second night, just before dawn, while Abby slept against the culvert wall, I heard something moving in the creek downstream from us. Not boots. Bare feet in shallow water. One step at a time. I raised the shotgun and held my breath. The sound stopped just beyond the mouth of the culvert. Then, very softly, something tapped the outside concrete. Once. Twice. 3 times. Not an animal sound. Not random. A patient little knock, like somebody asking permission to come in. I never looked. I sat there with the gun up and Abby asleep beside me and waited for whatever it was to decide whether we were worth taking. After about a minute, the footsteps moved on. I told no one because the simpler story was already horrible enough. I left contract field work the next spring. Now I manage fleet maintenance for a utility company outside Spokane. Indoor work, bright lights, concrete floors, paperwork. Boring, blessed paperwork. I haven't set foot in the St. Joe country since, and I don't drive county roads after dark unless I absolutely have to. Sometimes people still bring the case up when they realize I was there. Small articles resurface. Somebody makes a podcast episode. A Facebook post circulates about the cannibal cabin in Idaho. They always get the details wrong. They make it trashier than it was, which is saying something. What they never understand is this. The woods were not the scariest part. Neither was the crash. Neither was the gore. It was the normality wrapped around all of it. The motel with the stale carpet. The diner waitress topping off coffee while mentioning the missing Tacoma. The pilot joking about a truck on the strip. The county roads. The hunting season chatter. The old green pickups. The radios crackling with routine voices. All the ordinary American scenery surrounding a place where people had been butchered so often the killers kept lime in barrels. That's what stays with me. Not the blood, though there was plenty. Not Walt's ruined head, or the hunter in the roots, or the skulls lined on a cellar shelf. It's the understanding that evil out there didn't announce itself with masks or rituals or howling in the dark. It wore work boots. It drove pickups. It knew the Forest Service roads better than the maps did. And if not for a crash nobody planned, they probably would have kept going for years. I still wake up sometimes hearing that engine cough. Other nights it's Megan's voice asking if I hear that metal clinking in the trees. And once in a while, when it's very late and the house is quiet, I hear those 3 little taps again in my memory. Patient, deliberate, almost polite. I never looked, so I can't tell you what stood outside the culvert that night. Maybe one more victim. Maybe one more predator. Maybe something the brothers made and failed to keep. All I know is that when the deputies later inventoried the outbuilding behind the ranger cabin, tucked into a shelf above the lime barrels, they found a row of little keepsakes taken from victims. Watches, wallets, a Montana motel keycard, Luis's wedding band, and Megan's coffee tumbler, rinsed clean and set upright, with 3 faint muddy fingerprints on the stainless steel side. They were too long and too narrow to match any hand in the arrest file. I asked the detective what he thought that meant. He stared at me for a long time, and then said the only honest thing I heard from law enforcement the entire year after it happened. I think, he said, there was more alive on that mountain than anybody counted.